Today, I shall begin with a general introduction, after which I propose to switch to a presentation. I will hopefully be able to share my screen with you, so the pages of my presentation will help you follow everything I will be saying. So, the extant Roman Latin inscriptions are as many as 300,000. This, of course, is a rough estimate. About one half of this number was found in Italy alone. One half of this again, which means a quarter of the whole, comes from the city of Rome. Some provincial corpora are richer than others. For instance, Roman Africa. In the region we are now interested in, the epigraphs of Roman Dalmatia add up to nearly 5,000 items. Those of Pannonia to approximately the same number. Those of Dacia to more than 3,000. Those of Noricum to nearly 2,500. And those of either of the two Mesias, superior and inferior, to any number between 1,000 and 1,500. Inscriptions usually go hand in hand with other archaeological findings, but still, there are cases where important findings have not been matched with a sizable epigraphic record. In Serbia, such cases include Felix Romuliana, Justiniana Prima, and the fort, the Gradina, as we call it in Serbian, on Mount Jelica. Also, some periods have produced more material than others. The time span of Roman epigraphy extends over many centuries. But the bulk of inscriptions that we have comes from the 2nd and 3rd century AD. The reason for this lies less in the vicissitudes of preservation than in the fact that in most parts of the Roman world, and certainly in the area we are now concerning ourselves with, an especially large number of inscriptions was produced in that specific period. What scholars in the field since a couple of decades have called the Roman epigraphic habit was the regular practice of committing important public and private messages to stone, and of receiving and decoding such messages. In ancient cities, the urban environment not only tended to be visually impressive. The presence of texts carved in stone made the city vocal too. Even more so, the suburban zone with its graveyards along the avenues. To set up an inscription was a societal act. By its means, the dedicant spoke to a relatively wide public and even to generations to come. It is widely believed that epigraphic material gives us some insights into the society of the empire that no other source can match. This seems true in more than one way. Firstly, the prosopography of the Roman world is heavily indebted to epigraphy. More than any other written source, the inscriptions inform us about individuals or groups who in certain times dwell at certain places in certain qualities. In doing so, they both complement and supplement the literary sources quite substantially. Secondly, the epigraphic habit gave the floor to relatively large numbers and, even more importantly, a wide variety of people who inhabited the empire. In the inscriptions, we sometimes hear voices other than those of the imperial or local elites. Again, this provides a much needed alternative to what the literary sources usually offer as a standpoint. According to a widely used classification, any Roman inscription falls into either of two groups or types, public and private. The latter is the larger group, owing to the funerary inscriptions, which are the commonest kind of all. It is on Roman funerary inscriptions that we shall focus today and tomorrow. In modern Western culture, the texts inscribed on gravestones follow, with remarkably few exceptions, what we may call the minimalist model. Beside the names of the deceased and the years of their births and deaths, nothing is usually given. And in the remaining minority of cases, there is very little else to read. It is important to note that this model does not apply to all cultures. It doesn't even apply to many earlier stages of Western culture, and it seems mostly irrelevant for the ancient Greeks and Romans. In strict comparison to their modern counterparts, most Roman funeral inscriptions must appear wordy, if not clumsy or naive. This is not to call them verbose or distasteful, nor even to deny them the concision they really display. The crucial difference is that ancient gravestones contain texts, however short and concise. These are properly called epitaphs, be it in prose or verse, whereas the typical modern gravestone contains a couple of data entries we only call text in a wider sense. So today, we shall examine a dozen inscriptions taken from the published volumes of IMS. IMS is our provincial corpus, Inscription de la Mésie Supérieure. Here, we shall look at some features that may be of secondary importance for the epigraphist, but have interest and value for the storyteller. Tomorrow, we shall keep our observation angle, but concentrate on fewer examples and go more into detail. So now I will switch to my presentation. Let me share my screen with you. Um, this is it, I think. No, wait. I want to go full screen. Right. What I have now on my screen is a PDF page in full screen with some text and a relatively large photograph. Can you see that? Can you see my screen share?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
All right, so I can proceed. Thank you. My first example comes from Viminatium. To put it anachronically, the capital of the province of Upper Mysia. It is the side, one side, of a limestone sarcophagus. And there are, as you can see, some elements of decoration. On the left side, you can see the two of them. He holds a shield and she holds a distaff. On the right side, you can see Emma and Psyche. And then the inscription field has the kind of decoration that is called the volute pannonienne. It's the curved ornament on the right and the left side of the epigraphic field. Primarily, it was found on Pannonian inscriptions, but not only Pannonia is where they are really have been discovered. Viminatium alone has two such examples, and this is one of them. Now, the inscription is a good example of a short and simple epitaph. There is the name of the deceased, which is in the dative case. In this case, this Aurelia Theodoti is mentioned. Aurelie Theodote, it's the dative. The deceased is the dedicatee of the inscription. And then the dedicant comes after that, towards the end of the inscription, is her husband, Aurelius Gallicus. The dedication formally goes to Dies Manibus. In Roman funerary texts, this is the most common abbreviation of all. Dies Manibus means something like to the divine and benign spirits of the dead. So there is a general dedication to the spirits of the dead, and then a particular one to the person deceased, to the one the inscription is about. Then there is the Vixit formula. Vixit is a Latin word for lived. Then you have quite precisely the years, the months, and the days of her life. This is how many years she lived, and how many months, and how many days. And then in the nominative case, the dedicant, the husband, says Aurelius Gallicus to his wife, who is well deserving of him, who was very good to him. The epigraph, in its simplicity, gives the impression of sobriety and restraint. The few words that are really chosen are well chosen. There is this rarissima femina. So rarissima femina, to the woman of the rarest kind. This is common enough in the inscriptions, but not the most trivial praise of a deceased wife. In a similar fashion, the final words, bene de se merite, who was very good to him, is common, but still a bit less frequent than another similar formula, bene merenti. The same goes for this que vixit, instead of the simple vixit. All those small differences are really choices. And we are invited to appreciate these choices. And above all, to infer as much as we can from the two reliefs. He, holding a shield, is in the military. His wife, holding a distaff, was an ideal homemaker. And then they were very fond of each other, like Aimer and Psyche. Finally, there are some traits of language. There is this spelling E versus AE for a Latin diphthong. There is the inconsistent case gated in amnis, and then, the ablative in amnis, and then the accusative in dies. So this is about syntax. Technically, those traits of language are mistakes. They are substandard. It's what we call vulgarisms. In reality, those are rather light deflections from the standard that are found everywhere in the inscriptions and were probably considered passable within the epigraphic idiom. This is why no conclusions should be based on them in this particular case. Now let me find a way to show you the next page. All right. Can you now see the next page of my presentation? Hello, anyone there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Can you see my second page?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry for asking, but I just don't feel quite sure everything is going all right technically. So this one is from Mount Kosmai, just south of Belgrade. It's a funerary stele of sandstone. The deceased is an old man We know that from here. He lived 80 years. And his name was Aurelius Demas. Aurelius, of course, is a nomen, a surname, a family name. Demas is one of the Roman given names, the so-called third name, the cognomen. And that cognomen is of Greek origin. But the dedicants are his two grandsons and a granddaughter. They must be locals. They bear less conspicuous Latin cognomina. You see, Aurelius Lucidus, Aurelia Aquilina, Aurelius Vitalis. Nothing Greek in there. And they are the heredes, the heirs. As a rule, being the heir came with the obligation of putting up a monument. And the technical term for this in Latin is posuerunt, they put up. To whom? To their grandfather, Avio. This is totally substandard. The normal Latin word for grandfather is avus, not avius. This form, avius, is attested in about a dozen inscriptions. It must be analogic. It was built on the example of Avia, grandmother. Then there's the spelling Aquilina. See, Aquilina misses an I here. There should be an I before the L, before the two L's, Aquilina. This may or may not reflect a phonetic reality. It's a small but complicated question, really. Together, these details of language do seem to strike a vulgar note, but all in all, this is what I would call a no-nonsense monument. Simple but solid. The stele was prefabricated, as was often the case. This is why the dimensions of the inscription field, this is the inscription field, bear no relation to the length of the epigraph of the text. The preservation of the lettering, which is excellent, you see, it's all very readable. And the preservation of this is due primarily to the material, because sandstone is relatively resistant to weathering. My next example comes from Ravna, or Timacum Leaves. It's a funerary stele of limestone. The state of preservation is excellent. The lettering aspires to elegance, or to be more precise, the ordinatio aspires to elegance. The ordinatio is a technical term meaning the disposition of text within the epigraphic field, the design of the letters, the decisions on where to cut words, the formatting of the text, if you will. This is a well-designed, well-formatted text. It includes relatively many ligatures. For instance, here, you see, this is full of ligatures. This is me cum, a ligature me, and a ligature consisting of C and M, and a U, a smaller U, embedded in the C. And there are other ligatures too. These obviously were not used for lack of space. And then there are the decorative motifs. The ivy, it's here, and the grapevine below. They show delicacy of text. Let us look at the text now. Ismanibus Flavia Marcia lived 70 years, out of which she lived with me agreeably, dulciter, for 25 years. Now comes the name of the dedicant of husband, Gaius Valerius Aquilidus, Filius Valeri Viatoris, son of Valerius Vieta, to his sweetest wife, Connugi Dulcis. Benemerenti, we already know this, was very good to him. Simul et sibi vivo, and in the same time, to himself, still alive. Posit, put up. But this phrase, me cum dulciter vixit, lived with me agreeably, we may find parallels. It's not common, but the thought behind it is. An inscription from Rome from the 2nd century says it all. Cum quo vixit dulciter sine querela. With whom he lived agreeably, dulciter sine querela. This is a frequent part, the most important, if you wish. Sine querela, without with no conflict ever, with nothing to complain about. And in another inscription from Rome, Marito meo incomparabili carissimi, to my husband, uncomparable and dearest, qui me cum sanctiter et castiter et dulciter vixit, who lived with me in the most sanctimonious, should I say, and moral and agreeable way. So this sibi vivo formula mirrors the frequent practice of putting up a gravestone for oneself. We shall see another example later. The motivation is made bitterly explicit in another inscription from Viminatium, which isn't Latin but Greek. It's an elegiac couplet which says, Zon et Apollonis to mnin episa e αυτό κληρονόμων ειδών την υπολισμοσύνην, which is, forgive my Greek, which is, I, Apollonius, made this monument for myself, knowing how forgetful heirs can be. Finally, the Latin of this inscription is wholly up to standard. This contributes to the general impression of a classy monument, if I may say so. Remarkably, the epitaph tells nothing about the dedicant's social standing, and on the other hand, with no clear motive, it mentions the name of the dedicant's father. I translated that part without commenting on it, and I indeed have no comment. This is, of course, everything can be found on an inscription, but this is not a common way to proceed. This Filius Valeri Viatoris must have had an importance that we cannot fathom now. My next example comes from Larissus or Niche. This monument is roughly datable. It's not before the last decades of the 2nd century, which is based on the mention of the municipal status of Margum, the Decurio Municipii Margi. So Margum is the municipio. This is what gives the rough date for the inscription. The monument itself was mutilated after discovery. What remains of it at present is shown on the photograph. And the complete text of the inscription survives owing to an early facsimile, which you can see on the right. Sodis manibus Marcus Corteius Sextilianus, Decurio Municipii Margi. The deceased was a member of the Ordo Decurionum, the order of the town councillors. In other words, he belonged to the local elite. His monuments, as far as we can see, was accordingly expensive. After all, it's marble. And then he lived for 26 years and 5 months. Then comes the name of the dedicant, Valeria Licini, Coiux, his wife, Marito Desideratissimi, to her husband, whom she misses so much, et Coccee Colende Figlie Dulcissimi, and to Coxia Colenda, their sweetest daughter. The text suggests that Coxia Colenda, the sweetest daughter, was alive at the time the monument was made. Now comes the formula sibi viva, to herself, still alive, but the formula is modified somewhat. Et sibi sequiture, and for herself, as she will soon follow. This means the word sequiture. This is what means the word sequiture. She will soon follow. This seems a brief meditation on the brevity of life. Its position towards the end of the epitaph is no surprise, as we shall see. And there are some traits of language. Again, the problem of the spelling of the diphthong, then those months, meses, without an N, which should be written before the S, then the form conjux instead of conjunx, and then sequiture, the participle, which should spell secuture with a diphthong. So both the diphthong and the very form of the participle have gone wrong. Those traits of language, they betray then a degree of vulgarity. My next example comes again from Venezia. It's a funerary plate of marble. Not a stele, but a funerary plate. You see the orientation. There is decoration. There are the two naked winged figures carrying torches in their left hand, and possibly wreaths in their rights. They are here and here. You can see them, I believe. These are thoughts by the editor of the IMS to represent the genii of the deceased. Now, usually only male humans, only men have genii. Women usually have a eunuch. These may be the daemones, the demons in the Platonic sense, and their torches we may perhaps associate to their soul guiding function. All in all, I must confess, this is even more than I should have said about this. I'm quite perplexed with this, and I'm in no position to judge. The text shows that this is a wholly self-dedicated monument for a married couple. So it begins with Dies Manibus, the general dedication to the divine and benign spirits of the dead, but then come the two nominatives of the two dedicants. One is Aurelius Vitalis, and there's his wife, Aurelia Macedonia. Needless to say, they do not really share the same family name, since this was no Roman custom. It's coincidence that both bear the same family name, Aurelius, purely because this was a very common family name, a very common Norman. The funerary inscriptions often inform us of the last post, a Roman veteran, you see here veteranus, held in the arms. And here we have one veteranus ex mensore tritici, a former soldier who retired from the position of a wheat measurer. And then it goes on. and his wife, Conjux, Aurelia Macedonia, Memoria Vivi Fabricavimus. In the sense of tombstone, memoria is a so-called epigraphic word, a word found exclusively in the texts of inscriptions. And this is a rather common one. Literary Latin would have none of it before the Christian authors of the 4th century. So memoria is the tombstone, and fabricare, construct, build a monument, is an alternative, but a rather uncommon one to ponere, that we saw, or facere, that we shall see. It has all in all several dozen attestations all over the empire. In one case, even, there is memoriam fabricavit, like here. That case, that inscription comes from Arabia. In our inscription, fabricavimus, we built, may well be the right word, because this inscribed plate was probably just one part of a larger monument. The epigraph also contains non-standard phonetic spellings. Memoria should be memoriam, in writing, of course. And fabricavimus should be fabricavimus, with a U, not a B. This form, fabricavimus, looks the future tense. It is not. It's the phonetic confusion between B and U, which brought up this spelling. Fabricavimus is the expected perfect, not future. Spellings such as these, however, were considered vulgar. The form conjux, too, was regarded as less correct than conjunx, with an N before the S, although not as vulgar as coiux. So you see, we have degrees of mistake, all very well represented. There's the standard form conjunx, the less correct conjux, and the openly vulgar coiux. The inscription then contains what I have called the philosophical appendix. Many inscriptions end with a philosophical message or reflection of sorts. In this case, the message is twofold. Its first part is given from the viewpoint of the deceased. Quod nescientes accepimus, invitiret vidimus. That is, what we had been given unwittingly, we gave back unwillingly, indeed. Life, that is. For the second part, tafta, this, we have a parallel in an entirely Greek tombstone from Belgrade. The formula is pregnant. This means this is all there is, or even this is what life amounts to. Next, we have a monument made of porous yellow limestone badly weathered. We are fortunate to have again an excellent facsimile, which you can see on the right. This inscription reads as a review of vulgarisms at all levels of analysis. There is vocalism, anemola for anemola, and comedi for comedi, and then bene for bene. There is consonantism, hic habitat for hic habitat, then haveo for habeo, then here convixi for convixi, then quod, here quod, the quod. This one is purely a question of spelling, atque with a D. It's the conjunction, atque. Then there is gender. There is gender. In hunc monumentum appears to be masculine, should be neuter. Then there's the use of cases. In hunc monumentum titulum posui. Posui followed by in and the accusative. It shouldn't be so. Here we accept an ablative case. Then the Galimathias towards the end. Argenteos Amarconi fratres. To my brother, Argenteus Samarco. That's what it should mean. But then fratris is in the wrong case. It should read fratri if the dative is to be understood. And another, at least to the linguist, another interesting feature, ipsum titulum here towards the end. Ipsum titulum feci. The use of this pronoun ipsum is what the Latinists and the Romans linguists also called the quasi-article. This is the beginning of the Romance article, ipsum titulum. Now, animula, the diminutive of anima, soul. Calling the deceased animula, the little soul, is attested in several other inscriptions, but still it's noted. In the context of the deceased, there's the more well-attested diminutive misellus. Misellus, the poor one, but in the diminutive, is sometimes directly said of the dead. Now, lupus, that's the name, the little soul, now lives here, hic habita. And then another example of gravestone philosophy. Quod comedi, that is quod comedi, mecum habeo, mecum habeo. Quod comedi, mecum habeo. All I've taken with me is what I ate. Thus ends the first part of the text. And this first part, as you can see, was carved near the upper edge of the stone. And then she begins to tell something of a story. Ego Aurentia, I, Morentia, in hunc monumentum titulum post. Wrote this is what she seems to me, wrote the inscription upon this monument. Lupo Virgilio meo. Tu lupus, my Virginius, my virginity man. That is the one she lost her virginity to. This term, Virginius, is found in several inscriptions from Dalmatia, the Pannonias, the Mysias, and Dacia. So it may qualify as originalism. Cum quem, the wrong case, with whom, quinquaginta annis, for 50 years, bene laborari. I worked well. I worked for good purposes. Atque inculpatim convixit. And I lived with inculpatim, without blaming each other. Now, with convixit, the epithet for the husband, which is always the epithet for the husband, is complete. What comes next? Here. What comes next seems an afterthought in which another relative is commemorated. His name is Argenteus Samarco. We see the dative. But his relation to the dedicant, which is fratris vel subule le matris me, isn't clear. May mean, in total uncertainty, my brother, or rather my maternal half-brother. What is uncertain and makes things totally unclear is the presence or absence of the term suboles. Suboles is progeny, issue. But subulele is something that only bears a resemblance to this term. We don't really know what subulele means. Those signs means that the editor envisages the possibility that those two letters have been carved by mistake. So, an unnecessary repetition of the previous syllable. The so-called error lapigide. Very often invoked in epigraphy. The error lapigide, the error of the stone cut. My next example comes from Skopje, from Skopje. It's a funerary city of marble. An expensive monument. And a well-preserved one. The relief towards the top of the monument shows the Thracian rider, the Thracian horseman. A common enough figure, especially in the Balkans. Here, it stands in no obvious connection to the deceased or the dead. This monument is relatively mildly dateable. The editor of the IMS opts for mid-2nd century based on the name of the deceased, or to be exact, the naming formula. You see, Publius Aelius, Publi Filius, Posidonianus. This is from the good old times. The name formula includes not only the personal name, the praenomen, the first given name, the family name, Aelius, and the cognomen, the other given name, but also it includes the father. Publi Filius is son of Publius. Publius, Aelius, son of Publius, Posidonianus, Publius Aelius, Publi Filius Posidonianus, that's all'ancienne. Dixit annos 13, lived for 16 years and 9 months and 9 days. And then hic situs est. This is one of the major formulas in funerary epigraphy. Hic situs est is to be found here, lies here. In most cases, the formula is abbreviated to the 3 letters that you can see here on the photograph. HSE, hic situs. Then comes the name of the dead, Antonia Saturnina Avia. So Antonia Saturnina, his grandmother Avia. And then comes a Sabian phrase, Memor brevis pietatis, remembering her good early departed grandson. In the family context, the deceased are very often called piissimi, or it's another form of the same superlative, pientissimi. This ubiquitous term denotes the general quality of a good mother, of a good father, a good son or daughter. Here, the same is said otherwise. The dedicant, the grandmother, is memor brevis pietatis, mindful of the short-lived goodness of her grandson. The term may seem far-fetched to us, but I don't think it falls flat. The social standing of the dead and her late grandson aren't mentioned in the earth, but the monument is on the luxurious side. Let me add that the correctness of language points in the same direction. In the end, there's, once again, a philosophical opinion. It's a Greek proverb this time. On ithei philousin, outos apotniski neos. Actually, it's a famous line by Menander. He whom the gods love dies young. Per se, this points the epitaph fittingly, I should say. But the citation is not quite right. There's a spurious word, outos, here. And this spurious word banalizes the grammar and spoils the meter. The line by Menander, of course, is a line of verse. It's an iambic trimeter. and without the utos, it scans accordingly. So the verse is spoiled, and whoever came up with this appendix had obviously a little less Greek than was needed. With the next example, we remain in Kupi, this time quite near the modern city of Skopje. Now we are in Gorno Neretvi, where is the famous church of Saint Panteleimon. This is where this funerary plate of marble was found. It has, as you can see, very nice lettering and very good ordinatio. For the ordinatio, let's note the careful word division at ends of syllable. So, ini qua fortuna deceptis. That's not always the case in ancient inscriptions. Then there's also the word separator dots. They are mostly present. Almost all words are separated by special dots. There are two ligatures, only two ligatures in the inscription. And they come at places where there was some lack of space. The first is here, Gaius Valerius, you see the VAL ligature, 3 letters in one shape. And the other is towards the end of the inscription, Deceptis. This is the de. B and an E within it. So, oh, I'm sorry. The epitaph is dedicated to two brothers by their parents, Gaius Valerius Vojin, who lived 17 years, and his brother Gaius Valerius Maximus, who lived for 18 years. And they both lie here. Hic sit sunt. It's the same. HSS is the same formula as above, but this is the plural. And then the father, Gaius Valerius Lucius. He bears Lucius not as his prenomen, which would be expected, but as a cognomen, as a third name. Accordingly, the usual abbreviation L for Lucius is absent here. Generally speaking, in epigraphs, it is customary to have the praenomina, the first names, first given names on the left, abbreviated. And the abbreviation system is fairly uniform. So L for Lucius, M for Marcus, and so on. On the other hand, the nomina, the feminine names, and the cognomina, the given names on the right, the third names, are usually written in full. However, the most common nomina, feminine names, do have standard abbreviation. What we see here is Valerius, Val for Valerius. Other examples include FL for Flavius, VAL for Valerius, ULP for Ulpius, Now, the more intimate part of the epitaph begins here. The father and the mother, filis ad spem vitae studis perductis, iniqua fortuna et fatis. Filis to their sons, perductis to whom they had given studies through education, spem vitae, a chance to have a life, a chance to have a good life. And then, deceptis, but who are frustrated, iniqua fortuna et fato, by ill fortune and fate. The final formula, FC faciendum curaverum, is a very common one. Had it made, had the monument made. Unsurprisingly, the cruelty of fate and the iniquity of death are frequently mentioned in epitaphs for those who died young. This motif engages a varied vocabulary and a rich phraseology, mostly based on the classical poets. Decepti is one such word. The two youngsters were deceived or betrayed or treated unfairly by their fortune. This one is again from Ravna, from Timacum Minus. It's a chivalry series of limestone. And again, the stone contains less text than the facsimile because the stone was mutilated after the stone. The deceased, Valerius Marcus, bears Marcus as cognomen, not prenomen. Again, the same situation as we saw above. And again, the lack of abbreviation here recognizes the cognominal status of his name. So, the deceased, Valerius Marcus, dixit annis undeliginti, lived for 19 alla tronibus interfectus. This is the interesting part. Dozens of Roman epitaphs contain this phrase, alla tronibus interfectus, killed by bandits, with a special emphasis, an epitaph from Euphilena says, alla pronibus atrocissima mortem perversus. He died a most atrocious death by the hand of bandits. Banditry was legally threatened with most severe punishments. In Roman times, as most of you will know, crucifixion was the rule. Still, banditry was often suppressed by the authorities, but never quite eradicated. It reminds me of the situation in Serbia in the last decades of the 19th century. So, a father and a mother put up the monument to their good, to their well-deserving son. We already know all those points. Many dedicants felt the need to be explicit about causes of their kin's death. Let me give you some examples. There's an inscriptions from Brigatio, from Pannonia. Femmine rarissime ac pudicissime. To his wife of rare qualities, cujus mortem contigisse, per culpam curantium conqueror. Conqueror. I mourn the case of my wife. It's about an ideal wife, deceased because she wasn't given proper cure. So she died per culpam curantium. Those are to blame who were to give a proper cure, but didn't. Another from Salona, Dalmatia. Iulia restuta infelicissima. To Julia restuta, the most unlucky girl, interfected, annorum det, was killed at the age of 10, causa ornamentorum. So it's about a young girl killed for the jewels she wore. Lastly, one from Rome. It's about a little boy, 5 years old. And it says, Eripuit me saga manus crudelis. Eripuit me saga manus crudelis. So that little boy was killed by black magic. The funerary stele of limestone from Illumination. The dedicant is the father of the little boy who died. He holds the position of a beneficiarius legati legionis, an under officer. But this position in the army, the mention of the legatus legionis and his beneficiarius, roughly sets the terminus ante quem for the inscriptions approximately in the 360s. Excuse me, in the 260s, in the 3rd century. Parvulus ititus est, ultius Jovinus nomine. Here lies, exitus est, written in full, a little boy by the name of Ulpius Jovinus, qui vixit, who lived for 5 years, 6 months, and 23 days. Hic solus pater infumavit parvum. It is here that little boy was buried by his father, left alone. And there is alliteration here. Hic solus pater infumavit parvum. The alliteration is a means of emphasis. It is quite peculiar to Latin, ever since early times, ever since Plautus. This is a decent instance of it. The next sentence is a little awkward. Cuius desiderio lumen intentus dole. What it seems to mean is this. his father, absorbed by the grief over him, cuius desiderio intentus, absorbed by the grief over him, lumen donet, is hurt by daylight, that is hurt by the sight of daylight, doesn't want to live anymore, to put it bluntly. The final sentence is quite pregnant. A così sperava. From whom he hoped himself. That is, he hoped to receive funeral honors himself. It's a common idea in the epitaphs. It should have rather been me. That's what the father means. In this epitaph, occasional dactyls and iambi come at the places where some elevation of thought and style is taught. You see, parvolus situs est. This scans as the left part of an examiner. Then, nomine qui vixit scans as a first part of an examiner or a pentameter. And then, Ix solus paterum cum avit parvolum is an iambic verse, would be totally correct if we replaced pater with a synonym, say genitor, then it scans perfectly. Ix solus genitorum cum avit parvolum. Then again, cuius desiderio lumen intentus dolet, another iambic verse. I note that cuius is scanned as a monosyllable at the beginning of the iambic verse, which is totally all right. So this is where the expression becomes poetic, and those metric runs, those occasional dactyls and iambi, come as a byproduct of this. Epigraphs of this kind are really many, and they are called the commatica. The commatica. And we shall end today's session with another epitaph, which is a chromaticum, containing fragments of verse. This is a later one. It's from Narcissus. It's a marble slab of irregular shape. It was reused as a funerary plate. So the stone appears to be a fragment of an earlier structure, but reused. How do we know? It's very simple. The shape is totally irregular, so it's a fragment of something, but the inscription is complete. The next observation is that the inscription is Christian. The stone was found in the ruins of a church, and the inscription itself begins and ends with a cross. On the other hand, the text of the epitaph contains nothing specifically Christian. Such neutral epitaphs are not uncommon in Christian epigraphy. The text begins on a personal note with a vocative. Fili meus dulcis Antonines. O Antoninus, my sweet son. It goes on with 3 successive fragments of dactylic verse. Quem fata tulerum, who were taken away by faith. Octavo carperetan, as he was enjoying the 8th year of his life. Now, he is inconsistent from the syntactic point of view, because if we begin with a vocative, then we should expect a second person singular, not a third person singular. It's a slip of syntax. As he was enjoying, instead of as you were enjoying. And then, in what seems to be a new sentence, disrupit mors in vida vita. Death, jealous of life, severed. What was severed from what? This we are never told. This is another slip of syntax. Disrupit is left without an object. And there follows a shift, a rather sudden shift, to plain prose. Fecit vero terminum vitae mense September indizione nona. As for his date of death, it was the month of September of the 9th indiction. This 2 points to a relatively late period. The earliest year of the 9th indiction is 320 AD, and then 335, 350, and so on, every 15th year. The letter shapes, the paleography, as they say, points at a relatively later date. Traits of language include not only non-standard spellings, vitae here, or vitae with a difference, and perhaps octavo anno, octavum annum. It may be just a spelling, but it also may be case confused. Then there's vulgar morphology. Fili meus, it should be feeding me. And there are the 2 slips of syntax that I already mentioned. Carperet in the third person singular for carperes, and then disrupit without a nothing. All in all, the Latin of this text is heavily substantive. The expression is awkward at places, and this too suggests a late date. This is where my today's talk will end. Let me restart my video. Here I am. Tomorrow, I hope to show you 2 inscriptions and go more into detail. There are funerary. It still will be about funerary texts and the young deceased, but as I said, the cases, the cases will be complicated, so going into detail will be fairly necessary. Thank you for your attention.